Welcome everybody to the Cyvilan Podcast. My name is Hike.
And I'm Jeremy.
Okay, Jeremy, what are we covering today?
Today is the Depopulation Agenda, Part 2.
Continuation from the previous one.
Right. Last time we covered, we didn't really get through all the topics that we wanted, so it's a carryover.
Mm-hmm.
We covered Malthusianism, this idea that, billions of people must die for this whole survival of not only mankind, but mankind's ecology. Mm-hmm. And then eugenics, which tells us out of the population, which of the billions need to go for this New World Order thing to come to fruition. And so today we're going to cover the precursors to Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, which is the plan of how they intend to get rid of all these people. And then how did all this come about, the actual backgrounding, the history that's behind it. Yeah.
Yep. And I guess before we get into it, we'll do our usual housekeeping.
There you go.
And
housekeeping.
So we'd like to thank everybody for watching, for liking, subscribing, commenting, and all that good stuff. And, you can support us by going to theiconiclabel.com and purchasing a hat, t-shirt, or a hoodie, or a combinations that we have. Also, you can go to patreon.com/theiconicpodcast, where you can also contribute monthly. We have different tiers, and we also really appreciate that too.
Yep, thanks so much. Platforms that we're on all major platforms. We have a truncated list on Linktree, who.be/iconic. Tell them about the highlights channel. Yeah,
we also have a highlights channel, which is pretty much bite-sized version of the podcast. Some of the questions that we already have in the 8 to 12 minute format videos, easier to follow, easier to save, easier to share, and all that good stuff.
Yep. And so I think that's it for the housekeeping. Yeah.
We're learning.
Yeah, we're learning. Yeah. Thanks, guys, for the feedback. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the notes. Again, for anybody that doesn't know, we like to show some of our notes because the topics are dense, heavy, and then it helps some people to follow through and read with us. Yep. And so, again, we strongly recommend that you've watched the previous podcast entitled The Death of the Nation States, and then the one that comes after that. So that would be episode 4. Episode 5 is the previous one that we did that has the depopulation agenda. Yeah. And so now this is part 2 of the depopulation agenda. And so now we left off last time with a question. How do you get the world to accept the fact that they need to kill themselves and their children in order to make room for the most fit of the population to take over? And so it's easy, according to them. You revamp how people think. Not only rethink things, but redefine terms. Things don't mean what they historically have meant. And so you start to fundamentally uproot deeply held not only traditions, but ideas that kind of like are kind of like the cement that holds the society's collective thoughts together.
We also heard in one of our documentaries, Communist Subversion 1, where Bezmenov talks about this, right? Usually in the first stage, which is demoralization, it takes 10 to 15 years because that's how long it takes to educate one generation,
one single generation, And so going through that process, demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. And a lot of that stuff, we as you said, we've detailed that in Communist Subversion 1 and 2. So if people are interested to catch up with the background there. Yeah,
Communist Subversion 1 is on YouTube. Communist Subversion 2 you can only find in Rumble.
Yeah, Rumble. And it's broken down to bite-sized pieces on our Instagram channel.
Yep.
And so not only are you going to, revamp how people think, but you need another revolution. And we mentioned how revolutions are so important. So the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution gives rise to the middle class. You get the uprooting of the monarchies based on that. And then because you have this rise of the middle class, to get rid of the middle class, you need a fourth industrial revolution that kind of takes the wealth out of the hands of the middle class. And then while that's happening, you need to gut the current wealth that they have now. So you do that through borrowing a whole bunch of money with inflation. So the money that they hold on to isn't going to be worth anything. All right. So all of this stuff is orchestrated, planned events behind the scenes that seem to be natural occurring events, but as we'll see, none of that stuff is they don't leave anything to chance, just like this whole new pandemic preparedness. They don't want to leave any of this stuff to chance.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll probably cover one of these days in the regular Iconic podcast, where the World Health Organization comes with the member states. You know, and we're going to see a lot of the terminologies that we learned, like in Cyvilan Podcast. You know, we see how it's being used and how they manipulate the wording, the intergovernmental negotiating body, and then how they want to use that to learn from the mistakes that were made from the previous pandemic. And then to prepare for the next one.
Right. Yeah. But then having consolidated all the power into the World Health Organization. That's the juicy
part, yeah.
Right. And so just a little backstory there, you would have like, people forget that the World Health Organization is the offshoot of the Roundtable Organization. So these are direct links to the Cecil Rhodes Milner Roundtable groups that when they die, the Rockefeller Consortium takes over. And it, like an Inglorious Bastards style, it says your empire skills are a bit amateur. Rockefeller makes them professional.
Yeah.
And so let's get back to the notes here. So the agricultural revolution brought an abundance of food. The industrial revolution brought an abundance of a whole bunch of different things to the world. But in their mind, this came at a great cost to the environment. And so now you're going to get this idea that they want to use the environment now as a weapon to bring about the change that they see necessary in the world. And so,
like you had mentioned before, the kind of the idea of this is a ship going into the space, and then we're over capacity.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And so we're over the max operating capacity of this ship. And so imagine the people that are on board, are they just bystanders? Or are they like contributing to the overall organism? And this whole idea of like the useless eaters are the people that are the bystanders on this ship, Mother Earth, that we are now over the operating capacity of. And she can no longer sustain us. And so we need to make calculated decisions for not only our survival, but the survival of Gaia as well. And so the idea was that, we've destroyed the planet, and now you have an anti-industrial revolution or fourth industrial revolution that will save the planet. And luckily we have things like, AI, algorithms, machine learning, robots, and 3D printing that was going to replace the jobs of all the middle class personnel. And that's going to do two things. One, that stunts their growth, because now they can no longer dip into the job market to create future wealth to pass down generationally. And so, as we mentioned, at the same time, they need to take away the wealth that you currently have as the middle class. By
you'll own nothing and you'll be happy.
Yeah, but they're doing it by all of these crazy expenditures, right? So this idea that you've spent more in the last 2 years than the collectively the United States has ever borrowed in its entire existence. And so the idea of that is to give away the wealth of the middle class. And it's not just happening here in the States, it's happening around the world.
Yeah.
And so so you get this idea that this is going to be what the United Nations is going to call sustainable development. And so according to the Rockefeller Foundation annual report in 1969, we find man is now degrading his environment at a terrifying rate. The cumulative effect of advancing technology, massive industrialization, urban centralization, and population growth have combined not only to create imminent danger to the quality of human life, but even to pose threats to what? To life itself. Remember Alice A. Bailey?
Yeah, in the previous podcast, we talked about that they don't really care about the individual. They care about the life, right?
So not the form of life, like a specific person who has these issues.
Yeah.
We care about life itself as a whole.
We want to make sure, like you said, the Gaia keeps going, the ship keeps going. It's all about the ship, not the crew, not even the crew members. It would be, right? Probably, yeah.
And so it's it's funny that one of the people that has benefited the most from mass industrialization is complaining that mass industrialization needs to be stopped and putting the blame on this generic man term.
But that again, right, comes from what Bezmenov said when it's like, when you want to change something, you don't go and start talking bad about it. You become the main guy in that and then switch on it.
Yep. And so we get this idea that when Rockefeller speaks, the roundtable groups respond, echoing the same sentiment or theme. The roundtable groups under Rockefeller Consortium have planned to reduce the population in the direction, under the direction of the Club of Rome, to the Royal Institute of International Affairs, to the Council on Foreign Relations, to the United Nations. Because remember, there's a hierarchy there as well. And so the Royal Institute of International Affairs has a twin sister corp that's a subsidiary, which is the Council on Foreign Relations. And so they take preeminence. And so you would find that the Council on Foreign Relations takes directives from the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and the whole idea was to keep that hush-hush because people would then understand that the United States is still operating under the British Crown.
Yeah.
Right?
So in the previous podcast, we mentioned the spiritual hierarchy. Now this one is more like the
physical hierarchy.
The Cyvilan hierarchy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The part that we in the Cyvilan podcast care about, type of thing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so to justify the reduction of overall population, the world, you need this idea of like a green agenda produced by the same group.
I've never heard that green agenda. No.
Yeah, so the Club of Rome now comes back, and they're prominent. It's a roundtable Rockefeller Rothschild think tank that put forth environmentalism, climate change. First, it was called global cooling, and then we get this direct change to global warming. Went from there to climate change, and then now we're a climate crisis. Yeah. And so these groups are called crisis management groups because they create the alarmism and they step in and say that, hey, we have this great solution. And this great solution seems to be all of the national or the nation states get their sovereignty absorbed into this globally architected plan. And so as we continue here, you get this means by which the population will be reduced under this sustainable development goal. Well, how did all this come about? This is what we mentioned in the title. Well, the Club of Rome was founded by David Rockefeller. And so in 1965, June the 12th to the 19th, the Conference on Conditions of World Order is held at the Rockefeller Foundation, their villa in Bellagio, Italy. So it was, again, David Rockefeller, founder of the Club of Rome, who was assisted by Maurice Strong, who was his protege, created and drove this whole global warming strategy. And so the Club of Rome had produced a large number of reports that were proposing population reduction and global government on the basis of an environmental crisis.
So you mean it wasn't the scientists?
No, as you'll find.
Oh man, here I was trusting science.
Well, Fauci wasn't around at this time.
Oh,
so,
that's what it is. Yeah.
And so you get this idea that the policy in regards to climate change is created by the Club of Rome and pawned off on the nations of the world as if it were based on new scientific discoveries that were that they were able to shed some new light on in this whole climatism idea, right? And so if we continue here, it says, and so here are some of the reports that they've produced, and this is good reading material for anybody who actually cares to get into the climate change subject, right? So, and it's always fun talking to people that, they would read like a Yahoo article or something like that, or they've encountered some of this stuff in school, and not knowing this.
God forbid you watch the documentary.
Oh yeah,
you won't shut up about that one.
Yeah, or they've heard an Al Gore speech. But there's a lot of there's a ton of history. It's so much history that we could probably do a whole series of stuff on this climate movement.
Yeah, we had some good like the article from Forbes too, right? When they document how many times they flip-flopped.
Yeah, 50 failed prophecies, so to speak, of the climate change movement. And so as we go through some of this stuff, right? So Mankind at the Turning Point, 1974. Reshaping the International Order, 1976. Goals for Mankind, 1977. We should note here's what 1977 is when they made the change from global cooling over to global warming. So we were supposed to, in 2020 to 2050, we're supposed to be in the next ice age. But there's a reason why they had to change up the schematics on that.
Jeremy, like I said, science is changing. So what we have to do is just trust the science.
Even the science is changing about as often as the climate is now. So the next one is Energy, the Countdown, 1978. Roadmaps to the Future, 1980. The Future of the Oceans, 1986. I mean, there's limit beyond the limits of growth. That was a real key document. Limits to Growth was, and this is beyond limits to growth here. As you can see, the list is long, so people can kind of
screenshot or or if you're listening to in Spotify or Apple Podcast, you can go to our YouTube video and you can get the list from there.
Right, yeah. It'll be in the notes in the video. So what you get is 21 scholarly documents pumping this climate change nonsense. Behind that is this idea of global governance, because just like with pandemic preparedness, they can't entrust these misfit nation states to handle these ideas on their own. They need some type of, kind of like you have the 50 states of the Union, but you have a federal head on top of it, right? So imagine if these nations of the world were looked at as states with a federal head, on top of that. And so that's the actual model that they want to use. And so it's interesting that it's 21 scholarly documents. So if people were to read these, they would probably be impressed. They'd be peer reviewed. They have a lot of names attached to them, just like you saw with the COVID nonsense. You get a lot of this stuff that sounds so good, but when you actually, it's kind of like you pop open the hood and you look inside, it's not so impressive. And so 1969, you get the Rockefeller Foundation approved. This was what was known as the first full-fledged environmental effort program. It was called the Quality of the Environment, or the QE program. 1972, you get the Stockholm Conference, the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment, or what's known as the Earth Summit, commissioned an unofficial report by the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment by René Dubos. This was called Only One Earth, the Care and Maintenance of a Small Planet. And as you kind of go through and you keep up with the conferences, you keep up with all the literature that's being produced. So you get literature that's produced before the conference, and then people consume that, and then these end up being like talking points at these conferences. And then you're going to have takeaways. And so as these guys go back, the ones that get commissioned to from a nation state standpoint to keep track of all this stuff and make sure that they're going to they're implementing these sustainable development goals. So at this point on the timeline, we're not really getting into sustainable development yet, but this is the backstory.
Kind of like a precursor for the sustainable development, right? Yeah, because we think we want to do a whole episode just on that alone, because that's interesting. Yeah, the way we see it is more like them giving us the targets that they're going to go after, right? So we want to go one by one and kind of mention those.
So that's exactly what they do, right? So if they say that we want to end poverty, then you want to control the money supply. Yeah. Right? And so as we continue here, again, only one Earth, the care and maintenance of a small planet, and then prepared with the assistance of a 152-member committee of corresponding consultants in 58 countries. The book details her contribution to the formative years of the Sustainable Development Agenda and her role in building the International Institute for Environment and Development, right? So when you kind of see that this thing has a long history, and there's some heavyweights in the scholarly field that are kind of like gonna start putting their names on these papers. And this is when this idea starts to kind of get traction, because they're going to work with the local universities as well, and there's going to be a whole agenda that emerges. You're going to get kind of like how it needs to play out on a day-to-day basis, who's involved, who are the stakeholders, that type of thing. And so we asked the question, well, what was the outcome of the Stockholm Conference? And so as an outcome of the summit was Maurice Strong, who founded and became the first director of the United Nations Environmental Program, or UNEP, to coordinate the United Nations environmental activities. In 1972, Dennis Meadows writes The Limits of Growth. This is an extremely important document, and warns of overpopulation and props up sustainable development. In the introduction, he says, number one, if the present growth trends in the world population, industrialization, pollution, food production, and resource depletion continues unchanged, the limits to growth on this planet will be reached sometime within the next 100 years. The most probable result will be a rather sudden and uncontrolled decline in both population and industrial capacity. This is interesting stuff.
That feels more like a threat than a prediction. Right. Yeah, and from 72, now we're exactly 50 years past, right? So half a decade, whatever he said. So.
Yep. And so now you look at number 2, it goes, it is possible to alter these growth trends and to establish a condition of ecological and economic stability that is sustainable far into the future. The stage of global equilibrium could be designed so that the basic material needs of each person on the earth are satisfied and each person has an equal opportunity to realize his individual human potential.
Oh, did you think equal opportunity was new?
So these are a lot of buzzwords that are going to come up way later, because this whole idea of reaching your individual human potential, this is going to be something. This is a ruse that they're going to use later.
Yeah.
And so, as we have here as a side note, reaching your individual human potential, or later, in today's vernacular, living your best life. Now, there's all this self-help social stuff. So you get this social Catholic doctrine also mixed into this, because they have this idea of what it means to be fully human. But we'll go through that. That will be tied into the end of the mystery religion stuff. So we move ahead on the timeline here. 1975, Club of Rome published Mankind at the Turning Point, the second report to the Club of Rome. This report develops further the concept created by the Club of Rome to describe the complex set of crucial problems, political, social, economic, technological, psychological, cultural, and environmental, that humanity faces that needs to be solved, right? So we need people working on these ideas, and we wouldn't want to leave those type of things to chance either, would we? 1977, one of the first significant reports on global warming alarmism. Because remember, before this, it was global cooling.
Happens, right? Yeah.
This is where the switch takes place. So you get this global alarmism around global warming, energy, and climate. This is by Philip Abelson, Thomas Malone. This is a geophysics study committee which warned the average temperatures may rise 6 degrees Celsius or 42 degrees Fahrenheit by 2050 due to the burning of coal. Very interesting, right? And so it says world population growth might be curbed. Countries such as the Soviet Union that possess much of the world's coal reserves may be unwilling to serve as energy sources for others. And aroused world society might refuse to accept a drastic and unsatisfactory climate change. To provide assurance that such a change will be averted will require a carefully planned international program and a fine sense of timing on the part of the decision makers. Who are these decisions? This isn't a government speaking here.
No.
Right. And so these are the type of papers that get produced that, end up being policies of certain nations. And again, there's this hierarchy: Club of Rome, RII, Royal Institute of International Affairs, over to the Council on Foreign Relations here in the States. And so they continue. What is important, it's not that there are differences, but that the span of agreement embraces a fourfold to eightfold increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide.
Bad carbon.
In the latter part of the 22nd century, our best understandings of the relations between an increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and the change in global temperature suggests a corresponding increase in the average world temperature of more than 6 degrees Celsius, with polar temperature increases of as much as 3 times this figure. Really? Really? Nobody looked at this guy like, bro,
what
really?
What are you talking about? Yeah.
Are you serious? So now if we continue here, this would exceed by far the temperature fluctuations of the past several thousand years and would be very likely along the way have a highly significant impact on global precipitation. Okay, so you're gonna, because of the poles, you get the melting up there, and then that's going to put a lot of water in the atmosphere, so you're going to get a lot of precipitation around the globe. So you may change the environment in different areas, right? So page 24, a global average rise of 6 degrees Celsius would be comparable with the extreme change of a global temperature believed to have occurred in geologic history of the last billion years.
Oh, so not only they know what's going to happen, in the future, they know what happened in 1 billion years ago.
And so now you're going to see that this is going to be squeezed down into a really small epoch of time in which we need to act now.
We have to do it now. Yeah. I mean, they complain about the water rising and all that stuff. All I see is just like a fish housing program. More fish need homes. That's all I'm saying. So.
Yep. And so, who produced this report? Well, the report was prepared by the National Research Council, founded in 1916, with the help of who?
No way,
John D. Rockefeller, right? And so, at the time, was the chairman of the NRC, Philip Handler, was simultaneously on the board of trustees of the Rockefeller University at the time when David Rockefeller chaired the board's executive committee. So now we move along, 1976. So this is taking a step back. So we just did a 77. Now we're going to take a step back and do 76. United Nations Conference on Human Settlements, because you have all these papers that get produced before, and they kind of set up this idea. And so when the delegates come in, they fill their brains with all this nonsense, and they're going to go back and they're going to try to change policy within nations to reflect these United Nations ideas that are really the Club of Rome's ideas. And so you get this idea that something is going to call land ownership a social injustice. So the United Nations Conference on Human Settlements is going to do that. So number one, it says land, because of its unique nature and the crucial role that it plays in human settlements, cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, that's a bad thing, and therefore contributes to social injustice. Wow, a lot of this is going to be so familiar when we get later, right? So if unchecked, it may become a major obstacle in the planning and implementation of development schemes. Social justice, urban renewal and development, the provision of decent dwellings in healthy conditions for the people can only be achieved if land is used in the interest of society as a whole. So you remember, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Communism, this idea that they want to control all private property, the means of production, and all avenues of trade. I think this is a good place to stop. Like we said before, when we look at the statistics and the dashboard behind the scenes, we can see that around the 30-minute mark is when I think the
majority of the views kind of drop off. Yeah.
So I mean, we understand that it's a lot of information packed into like a small segment, and so smaller, digestible bites, and then moving on to the next piece. So Yeah, and then also this will allow us to probably post more often. Since they are only 30 minutes, we'll try to get maybe 3 a week out. Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, so sure. We'll definitely testing a couple of things out, see which one works. Make sure that we keep the quality and then the information there.
Right.
Because we feel like if we go to all the 60 minutes and then people don't get to see it just because it was a little bit long, this information is really important before we start getting all to the modern stuff, what's happening, all the shortages, all the inflation, all this stuff. Right. This is good background information. We're going to refer to this a lot. So that's why we wanted to get all this out. So
you got to remember, we're in the 70s in this data right now, right? So as you move forward, there's a progression to the 80s, obviously, to the 90s and the 2000s. So you get a lot of this backgrounding stuff out of the way so that when you read the Sustainable Development documents, this is not like something that just popped on the timeline and, we finally recognize that, we need to go green or some reason, So this has a long history. The history of it is attached specifically to the roundtable groups. The roundtable groups are the ones that are behind the scenes, being controlled by the Rockefeller Consortium. They are the offshoots of the Cecil Rhodes Milner Group, which means they're attached to Cecil Rhodes' dream, as Carol Quigley would say, the Rhodes' dream. And that was to create a secret society that puppets basically the entire world through the centralized banking system, but through round table organizations, right? So rings within rings within rings of power.
And they're doing it, so that's...
As our beloved VP would say, they are doing it. Yeah. They've been doing
it. Yeah. We are doing this. We've been doing this. Yeah, exactly. Right, so, all we want to do, make sure all this is out. We're going to refer to this. And once you have this too, when you read any new document too, at least for me, you can see all this, the terminology that's being used, how some of the, like you said, they changed the meaning of words now, you'll see certain things being used interchangeably, like nation state, member state, region, and then how they have the, we'll get to all of this. It's interesting because this is in the latest New World Order, World Health Organization documents that is coming out, and how they want to take control over your individual health sovereignty.
Right. Yeah.
But that being said, thank you for watching. If you stayed all the way to the end, even more thank you. Yeah.
For sure. Thanks for joining us. And remember, like, subscribe, share, engage. All of it helps.
We appreciate the feedback too. Let us know how you like this one, and then we'll change accordingly. Again, you can support us by going to theiconiclabel.com. You can get hats, hoodies, t-shirts, all that good stuff. Or you can go to patreon.com/theiconicpodcast. And you want to tell them where they can find us?
Yeah, so you can find us on a whole bunch of different platforms. We're on all
everywhere,
the major platforms. So a truncated list, who.be/iconic for that's our link tree. So just find it, click on it, and you can see all the places where we're
or any other platform. Just look up the Iconic Podcast, and we're there.
Yeah, it should show.
That's
it. Thanks, guys.